County public school system, considered one of the finest educational environments in the entire state of Alabama, has a history beginning in the latter part of the 18th century, when, as records indicate, Alabama's first public schoolhouse was built in the North Baldwin County community of Tensas in 1799. And at that time, nearly 10 years prior to Baldwin being organized as a county, the area remained geographically expanse. Agriculture served as king, and family farms dotted every section of the county. And in this era of extremely limited highway systems, individual communities built their own respective public schoolhouses, with the Board of Education supplying teachers to provide instruction. In the early part of the 20th century, the Baldwin County public school system boasted over 80 separate school districts, each with their own individual public schoolhouse. And as time progressed, marked with improvements in transportation and engineering, numerous school districts were consolidated into nearby areas, leaving us today with very few of the original and historic public schoolhouses which distinguished Baldwin County, beginning in 1799, as the birthplace of Alabama's first public schoolhouse. This documentary, commissioned by the Honorable County Commissioners of Baldwin County and honorable members of the Baldwin County Board of Education, seeks to illuminate these few remaining and historic original public schoolhouses in an effort to pay tribute to one of the finest public school systems in Alabama.
Located in South Baldwin County, the Swift School has been providing an education for the students of the area since the early 1900s. With such an early opening, the current Swift School building is the oldest public schoolhouse still in use in Baldwin County. The school began when the Swift family moved to Bon Secour and opened a sawmill. The school was a one-room building originally intended for the Swift children and the children of sawmill employees. Just over a decade later, however, the school became public and took on the name Swift Consolidated School as children from Witt School at Miller's Bend began to attend there as well. Soon the school enlarged, and Plash School, formerly located at Oyster Bay, joined in the consolidation. As the population in Baldwin County continued to grow, the school moved across the street from its previous location onto more land donated by the Swift family. Today, the Swift School remains the educational home for over 180 students in kindergarten through 5th grade. This same building that was used by the students so long ago remains an important asset to the students in the community today, who will never forget the history of their beloved building.
Swift School is located in the community of Bon Secour. It is a consolidated school, meaning that there were several smaller schools of the area that were closed, and the children were transported in, some by boat in that area, others by buses and wagons and other means of the area, and it was known as Swift's Consolidated. But like all of those schools that had special names, they gradually came to be known by the name of the community. So we in the school system would use the term Swift Consolidated or Swifts interchangeably with Bon Secour. But Swift Consolidated was the official name of the school. Beautiful wooden structure. It is one of those that I think I mentioned the other day, using the wider siding, wider than the 5-inch material, and the trim was a little different. The trim was put on first, and these wide boards were laid in between the edging around the windows and around the edges of the building. It was just good, neat carpentry work. And the school looks as good today as it looked the day it was built. Some really good teaching went on in that small school. And I can hardly talk about a small school without going back to my theme about the small schools. The children who went through small schools did better when they went to the larger schools than did children who began in the larger school. I'm not sure that I know the reason why, but I think I do. I know I was a teacher for 7 years at Foley High School, and another 7 years I was principal. And I noticed that the children who became our salutatorians and valedictorians invariably came from the feeder schools, from Summerdale, Alberta, and Lillian through Alberta, and Bon Secour and Magnolia Springs. Invariably, the honor students came through those small schools. And then in later years, while I was superintendent, I asked the principal of Baldwin County High School, we were faced with that perennial problem of shall we close Bell Fountain School? And I asked him to do a study of the last 20 years if he could do it. And it was the same old story. The honors students at Baldwin County High School came in from the feeder schools. I think I know the reason. Children simply learn more from each other than they ever learn from teachers. And in the smaller schools, these small schools with multiple grades in them, teachers had to use the teaching techniques that every teacher ought to be using in our classrooms that just have one grade. If a teacher, in every classroom in the country, of say 30 kids in it, there are pupils in that room that read on maybe a first grade level, and there's some of them that read on a sixth grade level. Their range of abilities in that classroom is just as wide as if you chose 30 kids out of sixth grades. And if a teacher doesn't break those down into groups according to ability and teach different things to different groups, the children just do not learn as well. In the small school, the teacher has to do it. In the others, the teacher should do it, but many times doesn't. And these children just learn from each other. The first grader is sitting there listening to the sixth grader recite, and you would think that they would get tired of the material, but a child does not get tired of a favorite story. They want it over and over and over again, and it would be just as fresh and interesting to the third grader when he finally gets to the sixth grade and hears it again. It's familiar. We tend to like that which is familiar, and the material never got old. And somehow these children that came up in the multiple classrooms just did better at the upper levels than their peers. I'm a fan of the small school, and I thought it was a terrible loss when we finally had to close the last one in Baldwin County. And it was because the final closure came because the patrons of the community just didn't support the small school. They somehow got it in their minds that their children would have a better opportunity if they went to the larger school, and they just dropped out one by one until it got to the point where the board just had to close it for financial reasons. I understand that. But if those people in Bell Fountain had known what a community treasure they had, that school would not have had to be closed. And we've lost educationally in that community and in this county because it had to be closed.
I can remember the first time that I set foot on the Swift Consolidated School campus. I felt like I was stepping back 100 years to see what education was really like in the early 20th century. And if you want to see a school that is still the epitome of community education, you need to visit Swift Consolidated School. It's located in the southern part of Baldwin County, near Bon Secour Bay, and the building itself that you will see today was built in 1920, and it was a consolidation of several schools in the area. The school has a plaque on the front that boasts it's the oldest existing school building in use in Baldwin County, and I would imagine that's true. The school, built in 1920, has served those children in that community consistently for all of these years, and today is still a vital, vital part of that community. It had a history that began before that building, however. The earliest settlers in Bon Secour, of course the early 19th century, discovered this was a beautiful location, and they named it Bon Secour for a safe harbor, and the earliest explorers there realized that this potential for this area is indeed great. Some of the earliest settlers there, say in 1885 or so, maybe the Cook family, did begin some schooling for their children in homes, small community homes, just in each neighborhood. But as a settlement grew up just west of Bon Secour at Miller's Bend, there one of the first schools that we have records of, the Witt School, W-I-T-T, was established there to school those children in that area, and also the Plash School was over on Oyster Bay. The Swift family moved to Bon Secour soon after the turn of the century and brought some wonderful changes to the area. Mr. Swift began a sawmill in the area, and soon it grew into a wonderful lumber business. Mr. Swift built a school in about, say, 1907 or so to educate the children of the people who worked at the mill, and that building was located right across the street from where the school is today, right on County Road 10. It's where Morgan Chapel Methodist Church is today. And it was school district number 21. The Witt School, being school district number 20, soon consolidated, say about 1916 or so, with that, and during that period they were meeting in the Woodman's Hall building there for a year or two, and then Mr. Swift gave 5 acres to the school system for the purpose of building a school, and that is when the 1920 school building was built that still stands today. The building had 2 large rooms at the front and a larger room at the back, and rooms were added later, and there were 2 teachers pretty much from the beginning. And at that time the Plash School joined, as did a few other schools around. Oak School came in at that time too. And it wasn't long before something called the Mississippi Settlement, a group of people here, had transportation to be able to come to that school. The building itself is just charming. The wood that is there is the original wood, and when you walk in the school, you can see the bell that hung in the belfry for years and years as the center of the town news and to begin school and end school, and that bell is held in a place of prestige there at the school today. The school still serves children in the community, and we are very fortunate that the additions to this building have been in keeping with the original architecture of the original building. And if you walk on campus, and you'll see the library that was added much later, the cafeteria, classroom wings have all been in keeping to keep the flavor of this community school. There is another old building on the campus, and that is a teacherage. The 1 to 2 room house there was built in order to be able to provide housing for the teacher. And Miss Swift, Ione Swift, who was principal and teacher for many years, did live in that house. We know she was living there in the 1940s. And today the building is used as classroom space for the school campus. The school adjoins Schoolhouse Creek, and there are wonderful stories of children slipping away during their playtime for adventures on the creek. And what wonderful legacy we have in these great stories. We are fortunate to be able to have a school that continues to be the center of the community. One year, shortly before Christmas, I had the privilege of standing right at this picket fence with every child in the school to watch Santa Claus arrive on a fire engine. And Santa Claus had been provided with the local community support and fire department a gift for every child in the school, who told Santa their wishes and dreams and celebrated a wonderful time as the center of the community. This is just an example of the ways that today this school continues to be a center of life for a wonderful little community, a dream in the south of Baldwin County.
At Swift School in the first grade. I was actually almost 7 because I had to wait a year to go to school because of my birth date, where it fell. I've attended school here. My parents, grandparents, and my own children have attended school here. It's like a home to me. My aunt was a teacher here, and she's probably the one person who influenced my life more than anyone. I wanted to be a teacher just like she was, Marie Carver. And she became principal here, so I decided that one day that was my dream, on one of my life's ambitions, to become a principal, not anywhere but here at Swift School. I enjoy what I do. It's like home to me. The children make fun and ask me if my desk turns into a bed at night, and I tell the little ones yes, because they know no difference at this point. Things have changed over the years. It used to be more community involved, and now we're getting back to that point. We're bringing that back. I think everybody's really busy, and that has a lot to do with that, but we're doing fun things for parents at night so that they can come up and join us. We used to have celebrations like the Maypole, the May Day, and I'm sure that you've heard about that. Miss Callaway, one of my former teachers that you've interviewed, always did a wonderful job putting that on. And that's what I remember, doing fun things like that. Actually, things I shouldn't have done when I went to school here. My aunt was the principal, so during the summer I would come up here with her, and I've explored the attic and underneath the school, and I can probably tell you every crick and crevice in this place. I don't plan on going anywhere else. This is home. I want to be here until I retire. I would like to be like Miss Callaway, full of life, enjoying everything, every moment. When I was a student, there were only 4 teachers at the school, and they ran the whole school. I had a 1st and 2nd grade teacher. Her name was Miss Epperson. 3rd and 4th grade teacher was Miss Callaway. 4th and 5th grade teacher was my aunt, which was Marie Carver. But when I was in the 6th grade, she became principal, which was a working principal. So I had Miss Snyder that year. And then in the 7th grade, my aunt taught me. She was in the 7th grade. She was also the principal, secretary. She answered the phone. She did it all. When I went to school here, the teachers stayed in and had coffee during break time, and all the children, we went outside and built straw houses and had a real good time. There was never any threat of someone leaving because we loved it here. It was a place that you just loved to be. I then went to high school, graduated from high school, started my family. I waited till my children were almost in school, my youngest, and I became an aide at Swift School. And I was an aide here for about 2 years, and I saw Sarah Tipton teach 1st grade. I'd always wanted to be a teacher, but Sarah brought that feel of I needed to be in the classroom and change lives of children. So I actually went back to school at night while I was an aide during the day here. I did my student teaching here under Robbie Owen. The next year I was hired as a second grade teacher here. I've taught here 16 years. Things have changed some in that 16 years. We have a lot more teachers. We have special needs children. We have pre-K 4 that we've never had before. But I always wanted to be the principal because my aunt had driven me in that direction. I went back to school at night as I was a teacher and got my administrative degree and decided that when Swift School came open that that's the place for me. I've never wanted to be a principal or teach anywhere else, just here. So I became a principal, and when I became a principal there was one big issue that I wanted to take care of right off the bat, and that was to preserve this old building. Every time I would call the county workers in to fix something on the floor, to fix a door, I would hear, "Why don't you just tear that building down?" And I decided then that I had to get it on the historical landmark building. And so I did. I went through the paperwork. Miss Outlaw helped me, and I got that covered. Again, I look at many different things that I want to change, and a lot of things have changed. I guess that's my biggest, I don't know, not accomplishment, but I'm just full of energy. I want to change so many things at one time that's my biggest hurdle in the way at this time. I know that I have to take it one step at a time. We've built a new cafeteria since I've been here, and we've renovated the old building, and it's been wonderful. The community is becoming more involved. I just love it. I love it here. I teach GED classes on Monday nights and Tuesday nights. It's a free service offered to anyone in the community because I decided when I became a principal I wanted to give something back to the community, and that's an area that I saw of great need. We have a lot of students who go through Swift School. Our graduation dropout from our school is still really high, so I figure if I can change their lives, if I can educate the parents, then I'm educating my students. So that's what I'm doing on Monday and Tuesday nights.
Well, I do remember my first day at school here, and I'll be honest with you, it was the longest day of my life. First grade. Back then we didn't have kindergarten, and my desk was right next to the clock, and I would look up at the clock and it would not turn to 3 o'clock. It really was the longest day of my life, but from there on Swift School educated me very well. I remember there was comment about coming up with some funny stories, and I've been running through my mind. I don't have any funny stories because the teachers here at Swift School were serious about education. And back when I was coming through Swift School, they were allowed to be in charge of their classrooms, so education was a serious matter. Not that we didn't have fun, and particularly morning recess and afternoon play period, which I guess you would want to call that physical education now, but that was fun. Baseball, football, basketball, the occasional fist fight, the occasional sneak off down to the creek and see if there were any fish in the creek down was a lot of fun. But getting back to first and second grade, I think the most memorable part there was the reading circle and having 2 classes. In the first grade, after you had your reading circle, you'd be back to your desk doing maybe some writing, but you'd get to hear the second graders read, and that always kind of made me want to be in the second grade or maybe be better than I was. And I think having the 2 grades for the younger grade was better. For the second grade in the classroom, I guess they just helped out. Moving in, of course, when I was at school here, there were 2 grades per teacher. Moving into the 3rd and 4th grade, things got a little more stressful. The workload was a little bit tougher, and you had to really learn things. You had homework which was not a whole lot, but you did have to take your books home and you did have to make some preparation. And I had a very strict teacher for 3rd and 4th grade, so I always wanted to do my homework so I would stay out of trouble. Do my homework and do well in class so that I could get to go to recess and play period. And of course, 3rd and 4th grade, that's when the students took on a little more responsibility than just their education. After lunch every day, we cleaned up the classroom. We spread sweeping compound on the floor and swept the floors clean, took out the trash, and in very short order, we're back at our desks and back to work. Mrs. Callaway, 3rd and 4th grade teacher, introduced us to music. Not that we didn't know about music, but that was very important to her as part of educating her children, was music. And we would dance, and we would listen to music, and a lot of times that was just about as much fun as playing baseball. Last comment on 3rd and 4th grade. I forget what time of year it was, but Mrs. Callaway said, who all wants to go out for play period and play baseball? And of course, all of the boys raised their hands. And then she asked, well, who would like to go to the auditorium and practice our dancing? And of course, most of the girls raised their hands. So she came back and said, well, now, let me ask you again, who all wants to go out and play baseball this afternoon? Well, I was a slow learner. I raised my hand along with maybe 2 other boys. And she said, well, now let's find out who all wants to go to the auditorium and practice their dancing, and the majority of the class raised their hand. So she said, well, you 3 boys, bring your arithmetic books and you can do problems while we dance. I thought, ooh, I was supposed to want to go dance, but I didn't. Let's see, 5th and 6th grade, moving on to Mrs. Carver. She was probably the most patient teacher I've ever had. And to introduce us to literature, she would read to us in the afternoons. 30 minutes or an hour, but I just enjoyed it, hearing the stories, the classics being read to us. I know a lot of my fellow students took a nap, enjoyed a little quiet afternoon, but I really enjoyed being read to. And of course, mathematics got more difficult in 5th and 6th grade. Well, along came what usually comes at that time of young people's lives, interest in the opposite sex. So you started thinking about girlfriends and maybe hanging out with girls a little bit, as well as playing baseball and football. And let's see, 5th and 6th grade, you had to have a cartridge pen. Help me out now. What little ink cartridge in there, and you screw it down, it's got that sharp point on it. You had to have one of those. Well, that's when school really got to be fun, because you got to have a tool. And you got to carry parts for your tools, your cartridges. And your cartridge would be starting to get kind of low, and you would wonder if you could finish your test on that cartridge, or should you whip out your spare cartridge and load it back into your tool. That was pretty neat. I just thought about that. 5th and 6th grade, one memorable 6th grade, probably the first day of the 6th grade, Mrs. Carver said that she was going to choose some of her students, that it was time for them to give back to the school. The school had been giving them a good education. It was time for them to give back to the school. And she called me up to the front desk, and it was going to be time for me to build a terrarium. She knew I liked tools, and so I had to build a terrarium for the classroom. I did real well as far as cutting the stand for the terrarium. I did real well scavenging up the gallon pickle jar, which was going to be my terrarium. And I did well getting the dirt in there, but I don't remember if I ever really planted anything. Something moved on. And yes, 5th and 6th grade, the first time I ever got in very serious trouble in school. And for the seriousness of the offense, it was probably the worst thing I'd ever done in school, or maybe even out of school. But the teachers, which back then there were no administrative positions, just teachers, the principal and Mrs. Carver, somehow took pity on me. And my punishment was very light. And I look back on that, and they knew I'd learned my lesson. They really did. And that was something else, wrapping up with all the teachers. They cared about educating their children. They cared about their children in a community setting. They knew all the parents. And when a child was out of line or maybe not learning, you didn't write notes home. You didn't fill out a report, or they probably did fill out a report, but they might have dropped by the parents' house on the way home, or maybe given them a call, and there was discussion, and the situation was worked out. And it just seemed so easy. But there again, there were not that many students, and the community was small. And the parents, the families, respected the teachers because they were doing such a good job. And I know in my family, it was appreciated that I was getting a good education. Well, let's see, back to that instant where I got in the worst trouble of all of my life. Guess what? They didn't tell my parents. I was called to the front desk, and Mrs. Carver said, "I don't think I'll need to talk to your mother about this." Load off my mind. Senior at Swift School, 7th grade. You step into the 7th grade, you're in a grade with one teacher, one class, and the principal, Mrs. Swift, was in charge of that class. And education stepped up one more notch, learning things about the Roman Empire, way back, history, serious history. Math got more difficult. And your giving back to the school stepped in a fairly serious manner also, because the 7th graders served lunch to the rest of the school. The small kitchen made the lunch, and when it was time for the students to eat, the 7th graders were in charge of serving the plates to the desktop. And that was an honor, because you got a little less education, a little bit more fun serving the plates. And let's see, 7th grade. Oh yes, if you were a good 7th grader, you got to ring the bell to start and end the school. You would be the bell ringer. Start the school, let's see, start school, end morning recess. The bell would ring to end play period. I mean, you got the whole school out there on the grounds just having a huge time doing whatever, the volleyball, football, mixing and mingling, and you want to get them back into the classroom, you rang the bell. And when the bell rang, everybody came back in the classroom, because if you didn't, you were in big trouble. The bell ringer. Also in the 7th grade, you got additional responsibilities. Putting up the flag. In the morning and the afternoon, the American flag was raised and lowered, and it was folded properly in the evenings. It had to be folded properly. And you were proud of yourself when you could fold that flag properly. 7th grade, if you really were an important person, like I was, living just maybe across the road, very close to the school, well then you got to put out the school signs. A little, probably 4.5-foot sign, slow school zone, had wheels on it. You would roll it out in the mornings before school, and in the afternoon, after the last bus would come through, you would come from home, back over, and roll the sign back over. Now, I'm going to have to tell a story on my older brother, John, who's 2 years older than me. I think he was one of the first ones to be in charge of the slow school zone sign. He thought it was a real big honor, because this was something new. We were going to slow the traffic down. Let's see, maybe 2 cars, 3 cars would pass during the day, but you would want them to go very slow. So he put the signs out and take them back in. Well, one Friday afternoon, somehow he was distracted and forgot to roll the sign back in. And that night, a car hit there were two signs, hit one of the signs and demolished it. So guess what? He lost his job. He didn't get to do the school signs anymore.
And it was very unpleasant out there trying to have the library on one end of the gym and PE on the other end of the gym with Coach Garris, and she and I came the same year too. So Linda Capps and Coach and I all were hired the same year. So she was able to get me down here as a library aide or library clerk or whatever you want to call me, but I came, and for 2 years we worked out of the gym. And the community down here had started Friends for the Library or some kind of a little working together trying to get a library built down here. Well, with their help and with some help from the county, the parents, and it was mainly women that worked every Saturday throughout the summer, and we built a library. We had the same women every Saturday, but not the same men. So that was an experience. We worked every Saturday and built the library. And we had mothers on top of the roof putting shingles in and just working hard for the community. And that's what's so important down here and what's so good about this area. It's such a small community and everybody works so well together. And the school is the center of this community. Everything is kind of centered around the school. So the library was built, and we had a little grand opening and everything, and I had collected all summer, went around everywhere buying puppets and stuffed animals and everything for the library, just kind of make it special, and we painted it ourselves. I was outside and painted all the trimmings and all that kind of things, but it was the parents that built the library. So for the first time, the children down here had a nice, clean place to go and check out books. And they had more than just a handful of books because we started raising money. I did plant sales, poinsettia sales. I started doing the shrimp festival, selling Cokes and tea and things like that, and raised money doing that, and book fairs. Anything I could think of that would help raise money for the community or for the library, we did it. And then the PTO gave us money, and we was able to start purchasing books and purchasing tests, and just about every book in the library has a test on it where the kids can read it and test. So it was kind of a shock to their system on having so many books to read, and then on top of that having to test on them. It's something they had never done before. So, but the children have really started reading down here, and that was one thing that I was real thrilled about, because I wouldn't want to go pick up a book that was dirty and nasty and stinky and read it either. So they finally got a nice library that was air conditioned and new books to read.
I officially started to school here when I was in 1953. I was 6 years old, but I came to school years before that because my mother taught school here. And back then, a lot of the teachers had to bring their children with them. They had started during wartime, and they were frozen to their jobs and made very little money, but they were wonderful, wonderful people, everybody that taught school here. And I remember some of my fondest memories was coming to school with Mother when I was little, before I started to school. We had a big pot-bellied stove, and we had a janitor that would come in every morning and get the school all warmed up with coal. We had a big coal pile outside. And then I would stay in the room with Mother, and her children would help take care of me. And I met a lady the other day that told me that how much she enjoyed me as a little girl, because I would sit in their lap, and they would let me use their paper and pencils to write and draw, and those are memories I'll never forget. And my mother taught school here, Marie Carver, for 41 of her 42 years of teaching. And this was the second home to me because the teachers would stay in the afternoons and do things that had to be done. They might have to clean, or they might have to do Christmas programs. They would write their own Christmas program every year. And whatever had to be done, they would stay after school to do. So they did not have an 8-hour job. And so I learned to, this was, actually I probably spent more time here than I did at home. But all the teachers were wonderful. And Miss Callaway, who was my 3rd and 4th grade teacher, one of the things I remember about her, she was very, very strict. And sometimes the kids would get really angry. And the only time I was ever sent to the office was one of the girls said something really bad about Miss Callaway. So I was kind of feisty. So we got in a big fight because I was trying to take up for Miss Callaway. So I got sent to the office and I got in big trouble. So, and the only other time I got in trouble was when one of my classmates in the 7th grade, we used to be able to play outside. We had free play, and we knew we better behave. The teachers did not go out and supervise us, but we would play out in the trees and we would build straw houses, which was our greatest time. And one day one of the boys tried to put a snake on me. So, and I was bigger than he was, so I took care of that, and he never tried to put a snake on me again. But if it had been anything else, that would have been fine. But I don't do snakes. But anyway, we played on the coal pile. We didn't have to wear shoes to school unless it was freezing cold. So we all went barefoot, and we just had the best time. And there was never a day that I didn't want to come to school. We had the attendance was great because all the kids loved to come to school. And we did a lot of fun things. Of course, we learned a lot too, but the things that stick with you most are the fun times. And we would, about once a week, Miss Callaway would take us and teach us dances, square dancing, or folk dancing, or maypole, and that everybody looked forward to that. And there were lots of things that I did here because when my mother was principal, when I was older and my mother was principal, anything that she couldn't get done any other way, she would call me. So I might be cleaning the bathrooms, or I might be teaching a class, or I might be working in the kitchen. But every moment I loved, and my mother loved every day that she was here. And when she retired, it was because she could barely walk anymore. But there was not a day in her life that she did not love coming to school. And she had something about her that she could, even the worst children, she got along with, and they all loved her and was very protective of her. And I was always so proud of her for that because I don't have that talent. But Miss Thorpe, who is the principal now, is my mother's niece and my cousin. But she took after my mother, and she has the same talent and the same caring about the school and the community. And she tries to incorporate the community in the school like we always did years ago. And we had very small classes. My classmates there was 11 of us in my class. And back then, it was like little families. You know, everybody cared about everybody. If somebody was missing, you worried because you knew that they really wanted to be in school. It's sad that school is not like that now. We all knew each other. We knew everybody's family. We knew all about them. We knew their needs. If they needed something, it was provided. I can remember time after time that my mother, she didn't tell me this until years later, and she had very little money, but she would buy things for the children if they needed clothes, if they needed something for a special occasion, and especially our 7th grade graduations. She would spend her own money and provide for the needs of the children, which is something she just loved to do. And she never told anybody about it until she was older. And but anyway, I had great respect for her for that. And Alan Swift, who was the principal here, she was my 7th grade teacher. And that was when we all learned to memorize poems, which are still, believe it or not, I can remember today because she made us memorize all of them, and they have stuck in my brain for all these years. But that was something we all loved to do also. And we used to, at lunchtime, if you were in the 7th grade, you got to come help serve lunch. And the lunch, we only had a little tiny lunch room, and we would take turns coming every day, and we would have to take the plates from the lunchroom to the desks of the children. They would all be seated in their desk, and we would take their lunches into them, and we'd have to go from room to room. And then when lunch was over, we would go back and take up the plates and bring them back to the kitchen. And we were also allowed to help with the upkeep of the grounds and the building, because we didn't have anybody that cleaned. So that was our responsibility. All the children at the end of the day, or most of the time at lunchtime, we would sweep the room and dust and do anything that needed doing. And it was something, you know, it was a real learning experience, because those kind of things are the things that you take with you throughout life. And I think it's sad that the children now don't get to do that, because it teaches you a lot of responsibility and things that you may not learn otherwise. But we were allowed to do a lot of things that children aren't allowed to do now. We would get, if we needed something for the school, we were allowed to walk down to the store and get it. And that was a real treat. We got to walk to the store. And so everybody wanted to do that, but you had to have a note from home that says that you were allowed to walk to the store if need be. So, but anyway, you felt really special if you got to do that. And it was not, in the summertime, it was really hot. And of course we didn't have any air conditioning, but we had these big old fans in the windows that, and I remember my mother, she taught me in 5th and 6th grade, and the fans made a lot of noise. And if everybody got really noisy, off the fans would go, because, you know, that would be like punishment, because if they didn't mind, then we couldn't have the fans because they made so much noise. But everybody pretty much got a handle on that, because when it was really hot and you'd been out to play and you were dripping sweat, that was, you know, you look forward to coming in and sitting in front of the fans. But it was a different life than now. All my children went to school here. 3 of my grandchildren went to school here. And my mother taught her brothers and her sisters and her nieces and her nephews, and 2 of my children she taught, and she also was able to teach 4 of the grandchildren, because when she retired she homeschooled them, but she had retired before they started to school, but she homeschooled them for several years. So she did a lot of teaching in her lifetime, and there was never a moment that she wasn't happy. She would have taught until she went to her grave if she could have. That's how much she loved it. There's a creek that runs back behind the school that everybody always called Schoolhouse Creek. We really weren't allowed to go there, but when we were in the 7th grade, it wasn't really deep, but we got the idea that we were going to clean up around the creek and make it really pretty, which we did. But one day at playtime, one of the boys fell in the creek and got soaking wet. So we all decided that the best thing for him to do is to run through the woods to his house and change his clothes really quickly before recess was over, which he did. Changed his clothes and ran back, but we did get caught up with, so we all got in trouble. But we thought we were doing a really good thing by cleaning up the creek and playing down there. And that was one of our, even though we weren't supposed to be there, that, you know, we weren't bad. We were just doing a community service by cleaning the creek. And it wasn't dangerous, not in our eyes anyway, but because we knew we weren't going to drown because it wasn't deep. But anyway, that was another one of our little excursions. But other than that, everybody was pretty good. You know, the children were pretty good. We knew we had to mind, and if we didn't, we got a spanking. And it wasn't a terrible spanking, but enough to get your attention. And we didn't have any classrooms that were out of order. That just was unheard of. And the children knew that, and they respected the teachers. And once in a while, somebody would get rowdy, but really very seldom. And it was just amazing. And during the wartime, my mother had, she always taught 5th and 6th grade up until she was principal, and she taught 7th. But during the wartime, she had a classroom with 2 grades in it, 5th and 6th, and she had over 50 children in her room and never had any problems whatsoever. I mean, the teachers just knew how to deal with it, and the parents knew the children had to behave, and they just didn't have problems, you know. They just knew what to do and how to take care of it. We had a canteen every day, and every day we had this big old cabinet, and that's where she kept all the boxes of candy, because we had a candy company that would come by and every week, and she would order whatever she needed. And so we would set out the candy every day, and that was all we had. We didn't have chips or drinks or anything, just boxes of candy. And the classes were so small that a lot of people didn't have a nickel for a candy bar or a dime for a candy bar. So if you were one of the lucky ones, which I happened to be, I consider myself very lucky because I had a nickel every day. And so I would buy my candy bar, and those of us who had money and others didn't, we always shared with everybody else, because we always knew who would not have money every day, so we knew who we would share with. But everybody was really good about that. And then if you were a special one, you got to help take the canteen down, put it back in the cabinet for the next day, and then somebody else would get a turn. We had a lot of, we had fish fries to benefit the school and all the parents and community. Even a lot of people who didn't have children here would come out and help fry the fish and make the salad, and then the community would come in and buy lunches, and that money we used to buy things for the school that we needed. And we had a lot of what was called Halloween carnivals back then, and we would set up booths in the auditorium, we called it. I think they call it the gym now. But we would set up booths, and the parents would come and have the best time, and we would have a lot of food there, and you would buy the food, and also that money was used to buy things that we needed for the school or the auditorium. Every year we had a Christmas play that my mother usually wrote those, and sometimes the other teachers would contribute, but they would always have a Christmas play every year, and every child whose parent would let them participate took part. And my mother and Miss Callaway and some of the others would make costumes for the children, and it was just a special event. And we had a lot of things that we did, you know, to make money, because we didn't have very much money to do anything with. So that's how we dealt with that. It used to be the kitchen. It was very small, because part of this was a storage room also. And we had one cook and she did all the work. She cooked, she cleaned, she did it all. And now there's a beautiful new cafeteria out there. But behind me is another room that was used later as a library, and it was also used as what we called where all the sick children went if they got sick and parents couldn't come. We had a sofa in there, and if one came down with a fever or whatever, that's where we would go. And another memory I have of this room behind me, not a good memory, but this is where the health nurse would come to give us our vaccinations. We had smallpox vaccinations, we had diphtheria, tetanus, everything we needed that was to be had back then. And that was in the day when shots were very painful. So all the kids would hate it when they saw the nurse coming because we knew what was going to happen. But anyway, that's what that room was used for, a vaccination room or whatever need be that was used for it. And then behind, on this side of us, on the north end of the building was another classroom. That's where the 3rd and 4th grade was. On the right is the classroom where the 1st and 2nd grade was. It's the biggest one because they needed the biggest space. And we had, in there we had a little section where we had a little playhouse and things to play with. And as soon as you finished your work, you could go back and play in the play area if you were very quiet. And on the other end of the building, on the south end, there was the 7th grade room, and the principal's office was there also. And it had 2 big double doors that connected to the office, and if the principal had somebody come in, she would just leave the doors wide open so she could see the classroom, so the children didn't have any problem. They had their work to do, and they knew that they better be quiet when somebody was in there having a conference. And then behind that room was the 5th and 6th grade room on the south end, and it faces what is the gym now, and we always called it the auditorium because that's where we had our plays or any community gathering. That's where people in the community would come to gather. And because it was the biggest, at that time, the biggest open building in the community.
I started at Bon Secour School, which is over across the river from here. And that was in 1931. And stayed there 7 years. Then it was consolidated with this school. And after consolidation, well, the building was, I don't know what happened to it, it just got destroyed. Then I moved here in 1939. Stayed here 42 years. Retired from here, from this school. In '82, at that time we had to retire at age 70. We don't have to do that anymore. At age 70 I had to retire, but my birthday was in February, so I did extend over into '82. I should have retired in '81, but you could finish out that year, that's your birthday. When I came here, I was in the 5th grade. And Mr. Holmes was the principal, and he had 6th and 7th. But I guess that it grew so until the next year I had to we half the 6th grade. He had half and I had half. I had 5th and half the 6th. And I only did that 2 years. Then I moved to 2nd grade. Moved down to 2nd grade. And after teaching in 2nd grade, I think maybe 1 or 2 years, enrollment changed, and then we had 2 classes each. I had 3rd and 4th. the first grade teacher had first and second, and I had third and fourth. And I stayed in third and fourth, and it varied just once or twice during that whole time. I had to move up to fifth 1 year. And then I moved down to second 1 year. During all the rest of those years that I was here, I had third and fourth. I'm a firm believer in allowing children to do a lot in the classroom. I am not going to get up there and talk. I allow children to do. So that's how I managed 2 classes. When I had my third grade class, and went to, after I talked to them and got them started, we went to fourth grade, and we talked, and I did my teaching session, and children were so good then. I didn't have any problems. We just, you know, it was just different from what it is today. It was easy to manage 2 classes in the same room, because there are days that the same thing, you teach the same thing in the same subject. If you're teaching multiply, well, the third and fourth grade could be taught together. I combined the different, and then of course in such as social studies, yes, I used both classes. And back then we had spelling. You know, I mean, spelling was a class, a subject. Each one had to do his own. That was separate. Reading, well, you could just kind of work that together. Just as long as you, well, my goal was to teach them and see them learn, and that's exactly what, and that's why I let children do lots of the work. I taught, but then I wanted them to take part, and I used my children a lot. Our school days back then began at 8 and went to 3. And in the winter, Mr. Miller used to come over and light the old pot-bellied stoves, you know, those things. We burned coal, and he was kindly elderly, but he would carry that coal in his manually and light all the 4 teachers. It was only 4 teachers then, and he kept us warm. And the beginning of the cafeteria, Mr. Holmes' wife made soup, and she sold the soup for 10 cents a cup, and that gave you know, something hot for students that didn't want to bring lunch. Otherwise, you brought your own paper bag. We had buses. In '39, and you know, I can't remember. We had a bus, I think. A bus brought the children. And from that, you know, it grew, and there were times that I had in my classroom very, say 20s, in the 20s. But sometimes, one year I had 52 in one classroom, 52 students in the 2 grades. But no problems, no, you know, they were good children and worked hard, enjoyed school. we had a spring, we called it a spring festival. And we did all kinds of folk dancing and maypole and, well, it was just a fun time. Then we had students against dads, baseball. And we did that on a Saturday, occasionally. And we sold refreshments. And that's how we made a little cash money to buy things that we would like to have. Back then we could have a Christmas play and a nativity scene. We don't do that it quit. You know, we had to quit. Was not allowed anymore. And I don't know if it is today. I don't know the rules. Remember, at Christmas time, we would have a Christmas play and a Christmas pageant, and we would sing, and we had children. And one year, this is not at Christmas though, we would send people over to Daphne in the what they call it, May Day in Daphne, and our May Queen that we sent won the county beauty from this school. That was years ago. And the children back then, at recess, they would go out and they would do we had no PE teacher. They would go out and make their own games, do what they wanted to. They could play what they wished. And baseball was one of their favorites. And there was, this is not really a sport for them. We had a few of the older children, the 7th graders, that would go down into the creek, you know, that little thing back here, and fish during that time. And of course they were doing it behind teachers' backs. But they would sneak out and go back there. And Mrs. Thorpe, who is principal today, was in my class, a very good student, and parents that really wanted their children to accomplish the grade. And she told me a minute ago that I wrote on her report card, she didn't want to learn her timetables. Back then we called them timetables. She didn't want to learn her timetables, and I put that on a report card, and the next day she knew her timetables. I didn't remember that. I mean, I wasn't supposed to know that anyway. She told it to me. All the workings that went on around the school had to be done by children. We took a few moments at the end of the day to sweep the floor, take out the paper. We didn't have too much open garbage because we didn't have a kitchen way back. We didn't have running water. They had to bring water and put it in a cooler thing, and the cooler, of course, was not iced. It was just a container. And we had to have cups. Each fellow had to bring his own cup. And let's see, what else at the end of the day? Just get the room in order. Well, before we had the cafeteria, we had to eat in our own rooms. We served children in the classroom, and that door, they served my children through that door. They would come in a line up to the there was a counter thing over there, and they would serve the plate and hand it to them through that door. We ate at our desks. When I first came here to teach, I thought that this was Bon Secour School. I had a cousin a distant cousin that lived out in the farm section, and they brought me down here from Bay Minette. And got down here, and this wasn't the school at all. It was across the river, and I had to get over there, and so they brought me down to the river. And a gentleman there who was Miss Bernice, the teacher that was here, his father, carried me across the river in a little tiny skiff boat. It was a little thing. And I remember very distinctly that when I arrived there, they knew I was coming because the superintendent had told, they didn't know that I was lost. But everyone, nearly the whole community, was on the wharf where we landed the boat, and the little skiff. And they were all excited that they were going to have a teacher, and I was excited to know where I am. I wondered. And from that day on, if I wanted to come over here to visit with my cousin, I called them my cousin, they were kind of distant cousins, Mr. Miller would bring me across and take me back. Bring me across and take me back. That was, he enjoyed doing it.
A local school, one that's close, one that, back when I went to school, a lot of the students walked to school. The ones that were farther out in the community rode the bus, but it's a local school. The teachers knew their children. The teachers knew the personality of their children. They knew their learning ability, and they adjusted, even with one teacher per 2 classes, they adjusted their teaching techniques so that each student could learn to the best of their ability, whether it be the first in the class or the last. And the teachers knew the parents, and the parents knew the teachers.
This building is old, old, old. I can't remember when it was first built, but this is the sturdiest building probably you'll ever find anywhere. It's been through many, many hurricanes. And it used to be the people in the community would come here because they knew they were safe. Even though there are lots of windows, nothing that in my lifetime has ever been disturbed by any hurricane that has come through. I doubt there's even been a shingle off the roof. But it's a wonderful old building, a great asset to the community. And if it could talk, it could tell us many, many things.